Hi, everyone. I'm Lynn from Stone and Chalk. I'm the Scale Up Success and Community Manager for Stone and Chalk here in Sydney. We have the pleasure of having Shaun here on the call with us all the way from Austin in the USA to talk about the realities of expanding to the US. So for housekeeping purposes, we've just realized that the chat's been disabled. So if you do have any questions for Shaun, ask it in the Q&A section at the bottom there. And then when we get to the end, Shaun can answer them. But over to Shaun to introduce himself.
Cool. Thanks, Lynn. Hey, everyone. Good morning. Appreciate you joining. As Lynn said, this will be recorded. Lynn, you guys can hear me okay and see me and everything, right? I think there might be a slight lag on the Wi-Fi. So I'm going to share my screen and then we'll kick things off. A second. Okay, Lynn, can you give me the verbal confirmation that you can see that? Because I can't see anyone.
Yes, I can see it. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Hi everyone, my name's Shaun Vanderkaap. I run a boutique consulting company called Oz to America, focused on helping Australian companies expand to the US. My details are there for anyone that wants to reach out. A few housekeeping things, as Lynn said, please type things in the Q&A. I can probably see that. I don't know if you can see that when I click on it. I'll look to check in on them a few times throughout and answer any appropriate questions. Otherwise, I'll try and answer questions at the end. I will leave a lot of time for questions. This won't take the full hour, so I know your time's valuable, so really appreciate everyone joining. And I will send through this presentation to the Stone and Chalk team to circulate post the presentation. Why is this not working now? There we go. So who am I and why are you tuned in and why should you listen, I guess? I've spent over a decade in the US working on everything from SMB, like small business sales, through to working at companies that had raised Series E, Series D, and then went public. The majority of my career has been spent in the commercial side of things, so sales, partnerships, business development, account management, etc. So my main focus is around the sort of go-to-market and attracting customers, retaining them, that side of things. Along the way, during my time in the US, I've kind of just sort of ad hoc helped out a number of Aussie companies when they had questions, or just through it in my network, help them to answer those questions, or maybe go a bit more detailed investor intros or general sort of go-to-market strategy, that type of thing. So I've been doing that fairly consistently for the last 6 years or so. I've worked with about a dozen companies, I would say, and now I'm sort of focused full-time on that as well. So as I said, I've worked in the go-to-market side of things. I've launched new regions. I've scaled startups. I was head of commercial for a seed round startup. Then we raised a $20 million Series A. My main industry is fintech and payments specifically. So it's sort of in the tech and fintech side of things. Let's jump in. So what we're going to cover today is ultimately 4 main realities that I've sort of realized over my time in the US, and what the top surprises or top things that most companies struggle with. And again, there's always going to be outliners, and I've made this a little bit tongue-in-cheek, probably been a bit more aggressive than what, but I wanted to really kind of hammer the point home that it's not just a larger version of Australia. And a lot of Aussie companies, especially the sort of earlier ones, think that they can just come to the US and things will be very similar and just scale because it's 100x bigger than Australia or whatever, 10x, depending on your market. We'll talk about some tips and actions to be able to overcome those realities that I'll outline. So sort of just get the brain juices flowing a bit around what you can do to combat that. And we'll try and have some fun. So, if you've got some questions, put them in the Q&A. As I said, I'll try and answer them throughout if they're relevant. If I'm not going to answer them further down the line, or there'll be plenty of time afterwards. Not sure if we can get people off of mute or anything like that to actually talk, but Lynn can try and figure that out once we're towards the end. So jumping in, the first reality is, most people that I talk to from Australia are asking about funding and that sort of thing, especially in startup world. And ultimately, there are exceptions, but US funds don't really care about what you've done in Australia. That's just the sort of facts. A lot of people I talk to are like, well, we've done X and, we just want to go over there and raise some more money because it's hard to raise capital in Australia. And raising money in the US is, yes, there's a lot more capital available, but there's a ton more competition as well. So it's not just something that you can come over here, spend a couple of weeks and raise some money unless, you're one of the complete outliers. Ultimately, US investors want to see US results and traction with the US, not just from Australia. There are some stats out there around investment that I'll include as an addendum to the deck, but APAC is probably the 10th out of 10 for, sorry, not APAC, ANZ is basically dead last for investment from US VCs. So to get an investment from them is extremely difficult and extremely rare. And part of the reason for this is that a lot of US funds actually have investment mandates, meaning that they can only invest in US companies or, and that's basically it. So even if they wanted to invest in your company, they can't, just due to the mandate of their fund. So what that means is, one, and we'll talk about this a bit on the next slide, you need to target who you're pitching to. You can't go with a blanket approach. And you also need to have a perfect pitch, basically, because it's pretty rare for US to invest in ANZ companies. And as I said, it's not that your success isn't valuable. It can be a good proving point, especially if you've got revenue as well, or you're cash flow positive or near that profitability mark or something like that. That does de-risk you. But to my second point, even if you are de-risked, there's a lot of funds that just can't even actually invest in you if they wanted to. So how do we combat this? Lots of planning. Again, it's not just a 2-week road trip or, a government-sponsored Austrade roadshow or anything like that. Like, yes, you'll meet a lot of people there and maybe some of them will be useful, but you need to plan and you need to have a very defined metrics, milestones. They want to either see evidence of traction in the market or a super detailed plan of how you're going to get traction and what that, what that's going to look like realistically from a time period. I'm just going to check any questions after this one. One other thing that you need, and I see this frequently, is a correct entity structure. Again, even if US funds do invest internationally, generally speaking, they want to invest into a US company. So there's often an entity flip required. I've talked to a number of Aussie companies that have said, well, we've got, a standard Aussie, I forget the terminology, C Corp or whatever it is, and they can invest into that. But again, most for IP reasons and mandates and that side of things, most US investors, that's going to be a huge turnoff for them. So making sure you've got the right structure in place for one, for investment, and then two, for operations. If you're hiring staff on the ground, you can't necessarily get a bank account with the right entity. And I'm not just talking about necessarily a Delaware shell entity, that you need beyond that potentially for other things like hiring, etc. And then obviously pretty clear, but you have to state it, target who you're outreaching to. So find out the funds or VCs or whoever that have invested internationally, figure out, have they done it in Australia before? What's their mandate? Can they actually invest in you? And then target and tailor your pitch to them versus potentially going after some of the bigger funds or, funds that only work in the US. And then consider angels and syndicates. Like, even if you've done an A round in Australia or beyond, the round sizes are so much bigger in the US, generally speaking, that you can get syndicated rounds that are bigger than Aussie A rounds and that side of things. So think outside of the traditional VCs and look to potentially continue on with the angel side of things, or look to syndicates that specialize in your industry or in your space. And often they're a lot more flexible around where they can invest, who they can invest in, how quickly they can invest, etc. I'm just going to check the Q&A. Traction in Canada, Payrec is asking. Generally speaking, yes, I would say it is more favorable than traction in Australia, purely because, you know, Americans, again, generalizing, I'm going to do a lot of generalizing in this presentation, but, you know, Americans can be quite insular, and the closer you are to home for them, then you've probably got a bit of a better chance. So yes, if you've got Canada success, I would say that's definitely more favorable, but how much more, that's hard to quantify. Depends on a number of different things. Cool. All right, moving on. Reality number 2. So, quick question here, actually. What do the 4 of these people, you might not know them, you may, hopefully, I picked well-known ones, but, what's common about these 4 people?
They're all men.
That's true, definitely.
Probably billionaires. I don't know.
Yep. There's another question there. I'll come back to that question, Francois. They're probably, some of the greatest salespeople. I know one's fictional, but from a sales perspective, which, it's my main area, that's some of the greatest salespeople around. And, there's a long list of this. I tried to pick some that are, relatively well known. So America has a huge sales culture. And this is not just around their own companies and businesses or their products or anything like that. It's also themselves, when you're interviewing or that side of things. So you're probably going to get outsold when you're first there, unless you've got like a completely new category or something like that, which creates its own problems. But ultimately, there's a huge sales culture in the US. So what that means is that a lot of Aussie companies I see sort of try and let their actions speak louder than words. And I know that's the Australian way, and sort of be a little bit more, reserved and not as brash and outgoing and that side of things. But to make it in the US, you need to be actively promoting yourself and your product and your company. So, that's just how it is in the US. You need to cut through all the different potential competition and that side of things. It's aggressive, it's competitive, and you need to stand out effectively. So, these people have built billion-dollar companies on the back of sales effectively. Musk is a little bit different with product as well, but ultimately, even a product-driven strategy, you still need to be able to sell that and articulate why that product is the best, even within the community that you're working with, if it's a product-driven strategy. So how do we think about this? And this is a key one I see often. Like I was just talking to Lynn before everyone joined. I go to South by Southwest every year and see the Aussie startup pitch, and that's when they do that. And you need to perfect your pitch, whether it's a pitch on your product, whether it's a pitch on like for fundraising. It needs to be sharp, it needs to be concise, it needs to be eye or ear catching, depending on the media. And ultimately, you need to be able to have your elevator pitch down. It's unfortunate, but there's a number of companies I see that just can't clearly articulate what it is, and in the fast-paced culture of the US, that they're not going to get a follow-up call or whatever the case. You need to oversell yourself, but you also still need to be yourself as well, and that's a fine balance to walk. So obviously being genuine, being authentic is the most important. But if you can augment that, just sort of, again, it depends on each person and that side of things and their own personality. But if you can augment that and turn that dial a little bit towards the sort of more sales side of things, then you're going to, or confidence is probably the best word. And again, being able to clearly say why you deserve the next step in the process, whether that's a follow-up call or a meeting or whatever, or why your product should be in their stack. Just turning up that dial to be able to cut through a lot of the noise. Ultimately, like any sales, you want to focus on problem solving. So why is your problem, or what problem are you solving, and why is your product perfect for it? The prospects that you're talking to need to see a tangible benefit. And again, in the US, people are getting sales pitches all the time. My LinkedIn is insane, the amount of sales pitches that I get. So you need to have some sort of cut through with that. And make the process easy for your prospects. And when I say prospects here, I'm talking either sales prospects or investors. Simplify the process for them. Make sure you follow up when you say you will. All the basic stuff. But again, it's those sort of things that will make you stand out, because there's a lot of, despite the US having a sales culture, there is a lot of bad salespeople out there and bad sales tactics in the US. So if you can be genuine, if you can turn that dial up a little bit, and if you can solve a problem and then make the process easy for your customers, that will give you the biggest chance of success.
So, Shaun, I hear that Americans love Aussies and our approach. Is that at least a trump card that we have to play with?
It is, to an extent. Like, it'll probably get you a foot in the door, whether it's the accent or just, the fact that it's Australians, and it is kind of regional in as well, in that if you're selling into the Midwest or something, it's probably more of an edge than if you're selling into LA or New York or something like that. And again, it depends on industry and that side. But yes, you can use that as an edge. I obviously wouldn't lean on it too much. And one thing I would say is that from a cultural perspective, Americans are very nice, for lack of a better word, in that they don't like to say no. So you need, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but you need to have strategies to make sure you do pin them down. Like, it's very frequent that they'll, say that they like something, that they want to set the next meeting, and then when you follow up, you don't hear from them. So, there's strategies to combat that and that sort of thing. So you unfortunately, especially in a networking type scenario, you can't always take everything at face value. But yes, if you're networking in person, you're an Australian, you're probably going to stand out to some extent. And then, use that, especially, if it's fundraising or something, just use that to create that sort of neural memory link at the very least, to try and get some recognition when you do follow up. Cool. Moving on. Number 3. This is something, again, I see frequently, as they all are, but the market over here, again, it depends how niche, and I'm doing a lot of generalizations on this, but the market over here is probably too big. A lot of Aussie companies think, well, it's 10x, it's 10x Australia. Like, obviously, that's great. If we get 1% of that or whatever the stat is, then we're set. But ultimately, when I say it's too big, what I mean is that it can be overwhelming, in that you can spend a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of resources, and barely scratch the surface and not really get anywhere. So that's basically what I just said there. So you need to make sure that you're honing in, and I'll talk on this on the next slide, but there's a huge risk of spreading yourself too thin. And this can be sales, like if you're trying to target the entire country. This could be partnerships where you're talking to 30 people when you should be talking to 3. This can also be company size as well. Company sizes in the US are much bigger, so the sales process can be a lot longer, and you have to work your way up the chain through different departments or whatever the case, again, depending on your product. So what that can mean is that you just end up having endless conversations and often not getting anywhere. And that more so applies to the enterprise mid-market type sales, B2B sales. If you're direct to consumer, it's a little bit different. So what I've seen companies with the best success do is they focus on specific niches, specific regions. They've got great segmentation of the US market. They know their ICP extremely well, and ultimately they can work towards that and not get distracted by the noise of other potential opportunities even. Yeah, so as I said, that don't let size become a barrier to your success. You have to be very diligent in often going small, and I'm experiencing this with one of my clients at the moment. It's like, how do we niche down even further to become like, instead of working on 12 verticals that they work on in Australia, like, is there just one in the US that we can dominate and then go from there? So how do we combat these? I've sort of talked about it a little bit. Having a clear go-to-market plan. So, target specific segments of the US effectively. That can be regional, that can be, demographic, it can be geographic. There's various different ways to do it, but having that solid plan will put you in good stead. Build a detailed sales playbook. What you want to do ultimately, same as in Australia, but you want to have a repeatable, scalable sales motion where you have a playbook that can be handed off to someone and hopefully replicated, assuming they've got the right skill set. So documenting everything that you do from a sales perspective, whether it's founder-led sales or whether you've got a sales hire or whatever, documenting that in detail is super important. And then adapting that to the US market from your current experiences. It's not going to be the same. There will be differences, again, depending on the company or the product. It might be slight differences. It might be major differences. But having that base sales playbook before you enter the US market is so important. Otherwise, you're sort of shooting blind, basically. And, if the sales book changes dramatically over time, then that's fine. But having that base to start from is often something companies don't have. And then again, test niches within your focus. So referencing that client, as I said, they're currently in Australia selling into about 12 industries and through a partnership motion. And now that they're in the US as well, about 10% of their customers, 30% of the revenue is in the US. But ultimately, they've done it via partners, but they haven't yet quite found their niche in which to work because they've been sort of focused on different verticals with that one partner. So now what we're looking to do with them is niche down into one or two verticals, and that might take time to find. Like, obviously, you might need to try 4 or 5 verticals before you find the winner in the US, but ultimately, just often just one vertical can be enough if you can dominate that vertical. Yep. Again, comes back to avoiding spreading yourself too thin. It's, very easy to get distracted, very easy to, see dollar signs or flashing lights or whatever you want to call it, and ultimately run after the next shiny object and not get any wins on the board. And then final reality, and then I'll open it up for some Q&A. It's expensive. People often try and do things on the cheap or whatever, and you bootstrap the US. I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm not saying you need to raise millions of dollars, but you need to be prepared to spend money. It's very difficult to get anything done without spending probably more than you're used to in Australia. Talent costs more. Partnerships, generally, you have to pay more for them. Conferences, travel, etc., all cost a lot more. So when it comes to talent, especially top talent, the salaries are a lot bigger in the US. And to be candid, most of them won't care about equity. Like, obviously, equity is nice, but unless you're Series E, Series D type thing, like equity in a startup is, very hit and miss, and you're still going to have to pay top dollar to get really good talent. The US dollar reigns supreme. If you're worried about the Aussie dollar, if you're pricing things in Aussie dollars, if you bring that up to investors and or potential prospects, they don't care. It might also make you seem foreign. Like, you need to, again, they can be quite insular, so you need to put things in US dollars, and it's a global currency. And unfortunately, for where the Aussie dollar is right now, it can be a difficult pill to swallow. But again, if you're going to enter the US market, you just need to accept that fact that everything's going to be done in US dollars. And it's a competitive job market. Good employees have options. There's a lot of pressure on them to perform. And then you also have to think about the human element of it. Like, why is it more expensive? It's because they have like what's called at-will employment, meaning they can be cut or fired for any reason. They've got, each state's slightly different, but they've got very few employee rights. All employment is at will, meaning, it has to be a pretty serious breach for them to be able to come back and say they should stay employed or get some sort of settlement or something like that. So, part of the reason salaries are higher is also to offset the risk that the employees take. Like, they can be out of a job tomorrow and it takes however long for them to find it. Health insurance is another thing that needs to be provided by the employer, generally speaking. But again, there's all these different little things that partly add up to why the US is expensive to hire from a talent perspective.
So on this point, Payrec is asking about, is it true that salespeople are comfortable with low bases and high commission versus Australia that just wants a high salary?
I would probably say no. Again, it depends very much on the industry, but over here, I would say that for financial services, which is my sort of background, even general sales, like, you're probably paying, especially with the exchange rate, as much or if not more on a base salary, and then being expected to pay commissions on top of that. So like, I would, in my industry, most of the base salaries are higher than what you would get paid at overall salary in Australia, and then you get commission on top. So there are some commission only industries or low base, high commission. So generally much shorter sales cycles with quick, fast win sales where the commissions can get ramped up quickly. But yeah, generally speaking, to that question, I would say no. And I would assume in Oz that most salespeople want commission anyway. I certainly did when I was working there. Okay. So how do we combat the priciness of the US? Pretty basic stuff. Spend strategically to get the best return. Make sure that you are investing wisely. It kind of comes back to what I was saying about being too big. The market being too big, you need to niche down as much as possible. And, part of the benefit of that is that you're spending wisely and not just throwing money going to 17 different conferences when you could go to 3. It's just a basic example. Explore cost-effective locations. When it comes to hiring, setting up your first office, setting up your first location, staff, whatever, or if the founders are moving over here, look at areas outside the New York, SF bubbles. It'll partly be driven by your industry as to where other hubs are. It could be driven by, in talent, those side of things. So, there's a number of considerations, but and I think post-COVID, a lot of Aussie companies have started to realize this. It doesn't have to be SF or LA or anything like that. There's a number of other regions. Austin's one of them where I live part of the year. Denver is another one. There's a lot of smaller cities trying to replicate the Austin, the Denver model, trying to attract, international startups or any startups, and potential tax breaks or all that side of things. So, if you're a finance company selling software to investment banks, then yeah, you probably have to be in New York City. But there's a number of other companies, a number of other industries that don't have to be. So just think about it when it comes to again being cost effective. Already talked about that one. And then something, a big thing here is leveraging your network. Make sure that you anyone and everyone that you're asking for if there's an external hire or something like that you're making to do who has contacts in the US, that the 6 degrees of separation or anything like that, who knows investors, anything. So the more you can leverage your network. And this is true for not just saving money. This is true for sales. This is true for investment and everything. Like the US is very network driven. It does take a long time to build that network, but if you can start that early, then you're going to reap the rewards down the line. Okay, so what have we talked about so far? How long's it been? Half an hour, perfect. The US market is a massive puzzle. It's challenging, but it's incredibly rewarding if you can figure it out. It's for most of you, I assume it's probably potentially the biggest market that there is for you. It doesn't mean that you should do it right away. As you've seen, these are probably the top four. I could probably list off another 5 or 6 different issues that Aussie companies tend to face. It's challenging, but it is rewarding. And you need lots of networking, a solid strategy, and lots of persistence. It's certainly not an overnight company an overnight country where you can come in and have overnight success. And most, very similar to any country really, but all the overnight successes have generally been laying the foundation for a number of years, and you just haven't heard about it until they make it big. So, stay the course, be confident, be positive, and there's a strong chance that you can come out on top. It's a challenge, but everyone on this call has probably built a startup, so they're used to challenges. So, yeah, happy to answer any further questions. Before I do, I'm going to give a quick shameless plug. I have a offering called Fast Track. It's a 3-month program, so 9 meetings, 3 1-hour meetings per month. Basically, it's a crash course on navigating the US market. So what should founders or high-end managers, high-level managers that are going to be in the US, like what should they think about when coming to the US? So kind of like what we've been talking about today, but much more detailed. It's open to multiple stakeholders for your company. So if you are considering the US, feel free to reach out to me. I talk about things like cultural and relational nuances, like how to sell in the US, how to speak, how to network. I talk about go-to-market strategies, pitch decks. It's very tailored to your own company as well. So I'll spend some time getting to know you, even go into detail like personal and location planning for you and your family. If founders are thinking of relocating, things like school districts or cities and that type of thing that you may or may not know about. So that's something I offer. I'll have the Stone and Chalk team send around more details about it as well. But if any of you are considering expanding to the US, feel free to reach out and we can chat. I see a few Q&As, so I will try and get to them.
So Shaun, should we try and get people to actually ask the question?
Yeah, if they can.
So we'll start with Francois. So Francois, if you're there, I'm allowing you to talk. So if you want to turn on your video and ask the question, that would be great. Same with Andrew from Payrec. I'll just turn you all on. And Dan Hill. So who wants to ask the first question from Francois? Dan, I think you're off mute. Do you want to turn on your video just to introduce yourself and ask the question?
Oh, I don't think it's letting me turn my video on. I don't have the option.
Oh, you can't.
Yeah, I didn't when I joined as an attendee. So
all good.
All good, yeah. So we're a startup based out of Adelaide, Stone and Chalk, who currently doing some work in the US. We've already got some US clients. I'm heading over there in about 2.5, 3 weeks to go and support some current clients and to go meet some potential clients who we've been getting introductions through for our partners over there.
Yeah, congrats. That's awesome.
Yeah, cheers. We're finding, one of the things with the US market is that show up mentality is, really critical, especially the kind of founder-led sales, getting out, being on the ground. Once we kind of break that ice, then we're finding that the remote nature of our work isn't so much of a roadblock. But I was interested to get your insights around, how often I think that, that face-to-face touch point is still important,
Yep.
If you have any kind of insights or ideas around how frequently we should be, budgeting and planning for that kind of international travel and touch point.
Can I ask what sort of industry or like who are you selling to size wise? Are we talking big companies, small? Like what's just a little
Yeah,
bit more
look,
detail.
it's a bit of a mix. So we're I suppose, more of a marketing software toolkit. So using connected packaging, connected technologies to deliver digital engagement at scale for consumer goods. Our focus in the States at the moment has been predominantly beer, the beer industry, with a focus on Colorado as a
Yep.
target. So we're working with some sort of smaller craft brewers up through to some kind of well-funded corporate owned brewers
Yeah.
that extend past just beer. So yeah.
I mean, just then you said stuff that's great. Music to my ears, basically. Like you're already niching down to a single state where there's a lot of brewing and that sort of thing. You've got a single industry that you're focusing on. So you're doing the right things. I would say, it's probably not going to help you too much, Dan, but like as much as possible, you're 100% right that, the in-person thing is, especially in an industry like brewing, where it is a little bit more personable and, they've got product that you can probably try and that sort of thing. So, what I would say is conferences and that sort of thing are massive in the US. Like they should, I think it's what's the beer one? There's something beer festival that they always have in San Diego. Like at a minimum, you should be at that every year. But then I'm sure there's regional Colorado ones and that side of
Yeah,
that. So like, go ahead.
no, so yeah, that's why part of my reason to go over is actually for the Great American Beer Festival, which is in Denver. It's a hard life, but someone's got to do it. But it's a consumer event, but I'm there purely just to be seen. It's more
Yeah.
about getting in front of the right people, being face on the ground, trying to create those networks and those conversations. And through that, attending like media pre-event parties, going into other
Yeah.
rooms. We've done
I
that.
would say like for you, like, and again, this is, as much as possible, but at least quarterly, like if you've already got clients here, if you've already got partners referring and that sort of thing. And again, I don't know your sales cycle, but ultimately, if you can batch up a bunch of meetings quarterly, then that would be super helpful.
Perfect. Now that's kind of where my head was at, was quarterly to minimum, and then
Yeah.
if we can sort of work around beyond that. But yeah, no, I appreciate it.
No worries.
Cool. Francois, or Andrew, are you there to ask your question?
I can go with Francois. Okay.
Yeah.
So, Shaun, my question was more around just the setup stuff. So if we set up in Delaware, this is what we're just actively beginning to do, is getting state-based benefits, like you've mentioned, Texas or Colorado, is it about being incorporated in those states, or you can be incorporated in Delaware, but set up your headquarters, whatever that means in today's non-physical world, in those states to get any state-based benefits?
It can vary, Andrew, was it? I think it can vary depending on the incentives and that sort of thing. Often, you can have a Delaware head and company, and then if you have to create a state-based one, usually it's not, in my experience, and I've got partners that deal with this a lot more that would be able to answer more accurately, but usually it's not necessarily the incorporation, but it's more so like, office location or employees or that side of things. So, but you also have to consider taxes as well. Like some states have taxes and that side. So, if you're having a physical location, you may need to have from a tax perspective, you might need to be incorporated in that state as well. So, but you can often pass through, like if you've got a Delaware one, then you can get a Texas one very easily or something like that. So, I'm not an expert in structuring, but I do have partners that, if you work with me, I can certainly introduce you to those partners that know a lot more about.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Andrew. Francois, you there? She is not. So we might pass over to Cisan. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question. It's a long one.
Oh, yes, that's right. Hope you can hear me. Thanks. Yeah, you pronounced it correctly. Lovely to meet you, Shaun, and based out of Sydney. And so I'm a founder, co-founder of a AI startup building a mental health and wellness platform. And our primary market focus is the States. And, we kind of sort of, in the build mode at the moment. And so my question is primarily more around, and we incorporated, recently, we incubated the startup at Harvard Innovation Labs in Boston earlier this year, and we've been doing a lot of back and forth travel to states to set things up. So I just wanted to, see what's your opinion because you live there. Do you suggest, this traveling to, set up the shop is a better option, or, moving there temporarily to set up shop? What's the, best way in your opinion, because you've been there? And what's your thoughts on, alternatively, if you are building remotely with our core team in Sydney or Australia, and then selling, it into the US market, more like a Canva model? So that's my first question, basically. So, I just would love to pick your brain on that.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, again, high level, you're going to be more successful if you have full-time boots on the ground in the US, whether that's the founders, whether that's a hire here or something like that. But, that's sort of, could you do it all remotely and just have the founders back and forth? Yes, you could. Would it be more powerful if the founders are here, especially if you're looking to raise money? Like, yeah. So, and whether that's a 6-month, 12-month, 2-year thing depends again on your business and that sort of thing. But if the US is your primary market and primary focus, my advice would definitely be you've got to have someone here full time, basically. So, or you've got to be prepared to do a shit ton of travel.
Right. Okay. Cool. All right. Okay, that makes sense. And do you know many other Aussies, who move, who are like founders who move on E3? Is that a E3 visa, which is for Aussies, or is there another option that you'd suggest?
There's a number of different options. Again, sort of my fast track program talks about that. But yeah, E3, Australians are very fortunate in that the E3 visa is available to us. It's only available to Australians. We somehow managed to weasel that into our free trade agreement many years ago, but it's a super nice visa. I've spent almost my entire time in the US on an E3 visa, just renewing that frequently. So, but as a business owner, there are some others. I think there's also an investment visa. It's like a B1 or a B2, and then there's like a management visa, which is an L1 or something. So there are a few options. Again, I know a number of immigration partners that I work with that I can make intros to as well as part of the program.
Awesome. That would be great. Yeah, if you could. And the other question I have is, you mentioned about the, high costs of, hiring employees more in the, Bay Area, particularly. That's where we're looking in. And that's something I've seen, the costs are really, really high. So is that, just like a, the Bay Area bubble, you would say, or is it across California? Like, would it be the same in LA, even if we are sort of, trying to be hiring in that part of the, city in California, or you suggest maybe to look for talents in, say, for example, Texas or Midwest or anywhere else?
Again, it depends sort of on the role. Are we talking of sort of generalist, and I'm just sort of hypothesizing here. We can potentially talk offline about this, but if we're talking like a president or something of the US that needs to be face to face with customers and that sort of thing, then you've got geographic considerations, or otherwise they're going to be traveling. If you're just talking like software engineers, especially in AI, from what I know of the industry, I'm not a huge AI buff or anything like that, but that they're in hot demand right now. So yeah, you might get them slightly cheaper in Austin or something like that. And I mean, you will get them cheaper and every bit counts. But again, like, do they need to be in California in person for any reason? California is also a bit more restrictive on the hiring side of things. There are more employee rights and that side. But Yeah, like no matter what, you're gonna pay a lot for a software engineer over here, especially in the AI space. But
Yep.
ultimately, like you could probably get it cheaper if you looked in other regions than California.
Okay, all right, makes sense. Thanks for that. Appreciate it, Shaun. Maybe I'll reach out to you on LinkedIn and connect.
Yeah, no worries. Good luck.
Thank you.
Francois, you don't need to turn the video on, but you can turn yourself off mute to ask your question if you're there. Maybe she can't. Do you want to tackle the question, Shaun, with
Signed.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it was something around Canada, because that was the follow-on question to Canada. So, vendor agreement for Amex. It doesn't say Amex Australia. Yeah, like if you have an Amex Canada agreement, then that's probably going to be more favorable than an Amex Australian agreement. But Amex is a pretty global company. But happy to chat more offline, Francois. My email will be in the report. Sorry, the PowerPoint that I sent through.
Sweet. And
Sorry, there's another question from Ayrek there. To hire in the US, would you recommend going through an EOR versus direct hiring? There's benefits to both, again, depending on your strategy and that sort of things. EORs can be quick. They can take care of things like health insurance and the like. Eventually, you're probably going to have to switch to direct hiring anyway at some point. But yeah, an EOR can certainly be a good stepping stone.
cool. And Matt has his hand up. Matt, do you want to unmute to ask your question?
Yeah, hey Shaun, thanks for the presentation. Got a question that's a little bit about strategy. Our strategy is to go to the US market, prove product market fit, and then engineer an exit with leaving the market with the majority of blue sky. So we don't want to, I guess, overinvest in the market, establish a significant presence. Our intent is to demonstrate product market fit, demonstrate repeatable sales process through some channel partners, and then be able to look for exit. What's your thinking around strategy wise, the time that would take to do that? We've got about 2 years in our head to be doing that. What's your thoughts?
Do you have product market fit in Australia already?
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
Okay. And what industry?
Our technology is industry agnostic. We work in transformation and change. We're a SaaS platform. So that's, it's that where we've got the most traction so far is really tier one in Australia. So resources and financial services and banking, insurance.
Okay. Selling into that industry, which I've got experience with, banking and insurance specifically, super long sales cycles in the US. So, I used to work at Adyen, which is a big global payment processor, enterprise sales, average sales cycle there. Minimum sales cycle like 6 months, average sales cycle 9 to 18 months. So like 2 years it's probably, and then especially like maybe if you want to be on the path to or like getting offers or something like that, but everything would have to go right for you to be able to sell it within 2 years, in my opinion. Just given the size and scale, specifically, and especially with that industry that you're selling into. So I'd probably hope for 2 years and prepare for a bit more, right, I guess, without knowing too much about your business. How quickly things were adopted in Australia or anything like that.
Yeah, okay. Appreciate that. That makes sense. And we've found similar sales cycle times in Australia dealing with tier ones is minimum 6 months, go through budget cycles, business planning, etc., to 12 to 18 months, depending on the business and the stakeholder engagement.
It's probably going to be double in the US, I would say then.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So you can't sip your margaritas for maybe 4 years, Matt.
I just want to start the next venture.
Already?
I just got too many ideas, right?
I would also say, Matt, on the sales side of things, and maybe Shaun, you can touch on this as well. Like if you've already got existing customers, like big tier ones in Australia that are working with you and happy, they always have friends in their same circle. So always ask for the referral. Just say, hey, we're branching into the US. Do you have any contacts? And just remember to keep asking that. And before you know it, you might have a few contacts that will refer you to break through over there just to help out.
Yeah, like, or even a lot of the Aussie banks have US arms or investment vehicles or that sort of thing. So could be an angle in for this.
Yeah, look, the resources company we work with, we're doing stuff globally for them, and so hopefully we'll be able to deliver into the US, which gives us another case study, so to speak. Yeah, so there's a couple of different things.
Amazing. Great. Good luck. Does anybody else have any questions? Feel free to pop them in the Q&A section and I'll get you to ask. We've got about 7 more minutes, so let's make use of this time. If you've got any more burning questions. No?
Cool. Yeah, so what I'll do from here, I will send the details, the presentation that I just did through to the Stone and Chalk team. I'll also include information about the fast track offering that I do. I do also do like beyond fast track, like general consulting and market entry and that sort of thing. The fast track's more just an entry style program for us to get to know each other. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, that will have my email on it. Also add me on LinkedIn. Pretty easy to find given my last name. And yeah, really thanks for having me, Lynn, and thanks for joining everyone. Really appreciate it and wish everyone the best of success if and when you do go to the US.